What I'd like to do now is we're going to shift to our last presenter for the day, and we have for you John McDonald. John, are you around? There you are. Great. Come on down. I'd like to introduce John. John has more than 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur, most recently as founder and CEO of Clear Object, a leading Internet of Things company. John is a founder and board member of the Indiana Technology and Innovation Association, chair of the Technology and Innovation Committee of the Indiana Chamber of Commerce, a board member of TechPoint, the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce, and the Indiana India Business Council. John, you're a busy man. That's great. Today, John's going to discuss to what he refers to as mega trends and how to embrace those trends rather than falling victim to them. Please welcome John McDonald.
Thanks. Appreciate that. That introduction was written by my mother, so that's why it's so long and boring. Great job, Peter. I heard the same thing from my wife the other day, and I'm not sure if I should be worried about that. So here's what we're going to do, if you guys are okay. I realize that I am I'm between you and the cocktail reception, which is not the best place to be on the agenda. So I'm going to try and make sure that this is at least a little bit entertaining for you. I was called in by a local chamber of commerce here in central Indiana that was in the habit of doing luncheons every month, as chambers do, and they had put them on hiatus for COVID, as chambers do, and they called me and said, we're going to have our first face-to-face event again, and we want you to be the speaker for it. And I said, that's awesome. What do you want me to talk about? And they said, all of this. Can you please help make sense of everything that's been happening around here? And I thought, all right, challenge accepted. So I decided that I would put this together for them, and I thought I'd share it with you today, if that's all right with you. Basically, what I did was try to think about, based on our experience in driving forward the technology industry around here, what are some of the mega trends or big things that are kind of shaping our world today that are causing companies of all sizes and shapes to have to figure out what they're going to do about them. And I've organized them into what I like to call ripples, tsunamis, and waves, or waves and tsunamis. So little short-term things that are happening in our world that are interesting, waves, which are sort of bigger impacts, and then tsunamis, which I think are going to be the things that are really going to change things majorly. And I also organized it into 5 different sort of mega trends. For the record, they are the gig economy, authenticity, customization, global learning, and autonomy. So if you're all right with it, I'm just going to focus on those 5 things and share with you a little bit about what we think is going on in this world in those various areas. So here we go. Gig economy, mega trend number 1. Gig economy is empowerment. I just want you to reflect for a second that the world's biggest car rental company is not Hertz. They actually went bankrupt during COVID, if you didn't notice. But it's actually Uber. But curiously to me and to a lot of people, they don't own any cars. The world's biggest hotel company is not Marriott. It's actually Airbnb, but they don't own any hotels. The world's biggest content provider, broadcaster in the world, is Netflix, but they don't make any content. They don't have any TV towers. In case after case after case, these companies are not just the up-and-comers, they're the market leaders in their industry, and they didn't even exist 10 years ago, and they did so without covering off on any of the capital assets of any of their predecessors. So what's really behind driving their success, if that's the case? And the answer is that all of these companies represent something called the gig economy. Fundamentally, what they are companies that enable individuals to be able to offer up goods or services or time or talent to others on demand across the internet through a platform with complete disintermediation. Some 60% of the products on Amazon, the universal store, are actually sourced through what's called Amazon Marketplace, which are small little independent producers, sometimes people working out of their garage, offering up products for sale globally through Amazon's distribution system. Even Netflix works this way. A lot of the content is produced by small production houses and posted up on Netflix in the hopes that you'll download and watch it so Netflix will buy more. So the growth of many industries today and the companies in those industries is really being driven by this concept of Hello. What's really driving the gig economy? Well, I contend that one of the technologies that's driving it is this thing called cloud computing, which I'm sure most of you in this room are familiar with. But what I want to point out to you is that cloud computing isn't really a technology per se. It's actually a procurement vehicle. See, back when I was growing up, we all had rooms like this in our offices, where these scary signs on the door that say, you'll die if you go in here, don't touch the blinking lights. You had to buy all of the things necessary to build a computer system: network, storage, compute layer, operating system, middleware, before you could finally be able to work with your data. But today, you can rent all that stuff on demand with a credit card in just as much time as it takes me to complete this sentence. That's an incredible amount of computing power that prior to the cloud was really out of reach for most companies and now is immediately available to anyone everywhere at any time. And that enables all kinds of brand new business models to spring up, like the gig economy. So where is the gig economy being felt most in its impact? Well, this is a scene that's playing out every day. It's likely to play out here in the middle of this presentation, as my kids seem to be constantly ordering everything from DoorDash, no matter what time of day or hour the doorbell rings, and up shows some fried chicken or some cheeseburgers or whatever. So this has now become a way of life for a lot of us. We may have dabbled with home delivery before of groceries or other things, but now a lot of us get this as a regular course of business this time. But what we're seeing now, though, is something more interesting. And that is the movement upstream. And it's now not just cheeseburgers and French fries that we're getting delivered, but now it's things like cars. People are taking home tours and closing on homes using their cell phones and virtual tours. It turns out that going to the finance guy's office at the car dealership and waiting for him to do all the paperwork never was a good part of the process of buying a car. The way it should really work is I should be able to call up and say, bring me 5 cars, and they show up at my door, and I drive them around, maybe keep one of them for the weekend, and if I like that, you work on the paperwork and send it to my email, and then I'll just keep the car. That's the way it should work, and that's the way it is working for companies like Carvana that are upending the traditional model of how cars are purchased. But if you move up a little bit higher stream, there's other ways that this gig economy is making some interesting impacts. Uber just launched a service called Uber Connect. Uber Connect is a package partial delivery service. It essentially allows you, if you have a pickup truck in your spare time, to be able to open up the app and drive a product or a pallet of goods or a package from one place to another. This is a huge threat to FedEx, to UPS, to the less than truckload LTL trucking industry, as people with some spare time and a little bit of bed space can now become part of the distribution mechanism of goods and services in our economy. But one of the more longer-term impacts of the gig economy is what's called distributed gig manufacturing. Distributed gig manufacturing. So we have tightly bound the idea of producing products in factories to the factory itself. In other words, we have to go there in order to be able to be a factory worker and produce something for the benefit of the company. But now what we're seeing is that people are able to devote small portions of their garages, or maybe their basements, or maybe a shed out back, or maybe even some space that they rent somewhere, and be able to produce a product or a widget or something that gets sent to them, raw materials, by an on-demand courier, and then when they're done, they load them up in a box and they're picked up by an on-demand courier, and they keep producing away in their own homes without ever setting foot in a factory. So it allows us to disassociate the idea of manufacturing from everybody being in the same place in the factory and spread it out and, if you will, work from home as a factory worker. All enabled by the thing called the gig economy. So with me, that's pretty good. Let's go on to another one. This one's called authenticity. Don't worry about what's cool or not cool, says Zach Posen, a fashion designer. Authenticity is what is cool. Authenticity is the idea that we want to know from where everything comes. We want to know that it's the real thing, and we want to know that it's genuine and true. That is, for a lot of us, last Christmas couldn't eat romaine lettuce, as I recall, because some, farmer in some farm in California had something. I don't think we ever really found out what it was. This is actually kind of silly in this day and age because we can now spray biomarkers on plants and be able to trace back a vegetable, not only to which farm it came from, but even what row it was planted in. And then you ask yourself, well, why don't we do that? Well, because the farmer who plants that plant doesn't get any opportunity to be able to monetize the value of that commodity good for the cost of having sprayed on that biomarker. But there's an enabling technology called the blockchain. Who's heard of the blockchain in this room? Who knows what the blockchain is in this room? Okay, good. I get to explain it to you. Well, so when this concept of cryptocurrency, you've definitely heard of that before. It seems to always be in the news. A cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these different, Dogecoin, all the rest of these, are curious in that they were designed to not actually physically exist in the real world. In other words, you can't hold one in your hand. So it sets up a very curious question, or interesting question. How do you know you have one if you can't hold one in your hand? And the answer, logically, is the only way to know is to be able to trace every transaction, a handoff, if you will, of that Bitcoin, all the way back to when it was originally created or mined. That's how you know you have one, to be able to audit it. So the creators of cryptocurrency have created a public record, an auditable public record of every transaction of every single Bitcoin or cryptocurrency and who had it and who sold it and who bought it and how it was transferred, so that anyone can take any Bitcoin and be able to trace back how it was created, all the way back to how it was created. That's what the blockchain is. It's no more complicated than that. And so that's very interesting, but a lot of us in the technology business can think of a lot of other interesting ways you could apply the concept of this trace route, if you will, of a particular piece of data all the way back to its inception. So go back to the example of the farmer. If I were to spray this biomarker on sort of a green bean, I might be able to blockchain the farm it was on, the row it was planted in, the hand that picked it, the truck it rode on over to the warehouse where it was stored, the truck it rode on to the factory where it was squeezed into a can, where the can sat on the shelf in the warehouse, the hand that pulled it down, put it in the truck, sent it out to the grocery store, so that when I got to the shelf in the grocery store, I could take a scanner or my phone and go bleep, bleep, and be able to see the history of that can of beans all the way back to the field that it was picked from. And that one took a shorter route, so that's probably better for me and more nutritious, so I'll pick that can, meaning that I can charge more for that can, and all the value goes all the way back to the original farmer for spraying the biomarker on the plant. So if you can imagine all the different ways we might be able to use blockchain to be able to ensure authenticity in pieces of data that we work on. So where is authenticity playing a role? Well, we've all become familiar with this scene. How many of you last January knew what Zoom was? All right. So now we all have this as a daily way of life. And what I think is most interesting about this, among other things, is that we are now welcoming people into our homes on a daily and hourly basis. You're seeing into our homes. And if the dog walks by, or the kid walks through, wearing diapers, this would have been something we would have been mortified about over a year ago, but now is a normal way of life. See, what it's done is it has obliterated this probably already fake line between what is work and what is home. We tried very hard prior to COVID to be able to separate those two concepts and keep them compartmentalized, but all of us really knew it was kind of a big joke. You can't really do that. Life impedes on work and work impedes on life, and now we've just sort of obliterated the line between those two things. So where does that start to impact? Well, if you're in the manufacturing construction industry, it impacts you greatly. This is a floor plan of something called a work-live loft. Has anybody ever heard of a work-live loft before? Maybe you live in one. Well, we had a few of these springing up around here too in central Indiana. And what it is this apartment that is designed to double as a place of business. In the top center of the photograph, you see a blue wall there. That's actually a door to the outside, and you see a little coat rack there, maybe to the street. You come in, and you're welcomed into a living room-like setting. Maybe this is perfect for a florist or a baker or a photographer or somebody that, does some gig economy work of their own. We can sit at the table in the corner and see some of my work. But if you see there's a door in the middle of the apartment, it leads to the upper left-hand corner. What's that door lead to? A bedroom and a bathroom. See, this is a space that's designed to double both as a place of business as well as a place that you live. And so these are now challenging, these sort of blurry lines between what is work and what is home, is challenging home builders, is challenging apartment builders to try and react to and change to these changing tastes and trends of people that want to keep that line between work and home blurry or obliterated. Another impact of this, I think, a medium term, is the destruction of what I like to call useless business travel. I was talking recently with a friend of mine who manages a bunch of drug reps at Eli Lilly here in town, and he said, if I've got a new drug rep and he's going to go out and visit that doctor in Billings, Montana, maybe that makes sense for the first time, but the seventh time? Why am I sending him on an airplane for the seventh time? What we've discovered through COVID, I think, is that it's very difficult to build a relationship virtually, but you can maintain one for a long time virtually. And so now, prior to COVID, there was simply no risk to taking a plane flight. We went for over a decade without a single loss of life in the American airline industry, which is an unprecedented period of time. It literally was zero risk. But now there's a risk. They're small, though it might be, but there is one. And it's going to cause, and has already caused, people to think twice, 3 times, about whether or not it makes sense to get on that airplane and travel to that other place, especially if you know that all the time and energy that it takes to travel, is it really worth it anymore? Before, if you asked a customer of yours, would it be okay if we would convert this into a virtual conference? It was another way of basically saying, I don't care enough about you to go through all the trouble to come out and see you in person. But now it's not that way anymore. And so that is really a major change in how the travel industry has to deal with what's going on. Another example of this is in what we do travel for. There was a young woman in our office who was wanting to understand the impact of global warming on Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, a lot of us would just go to Google and search that. I know I would, but not her. What she did was she organized a group of her friends to do a massive can drive from all the technology companies in central Indiana that they then turned in and paid for a trip so that they could go to Mount Kilimanjaro and see it for themselves. See, young folks today particularly are very interested in the real thing. They're not interested in the, going to the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas. They want to go to Paris. They want to see it for themselves. And so what's driving the travel industry now, particularly among younger folks, is a desire to actually have the authentic, real experience, to be able to really see it for myself and not have this sort of fake, twisted, or Instagram version of what it is that I think might be going on. This has an impact in our food chain as well. A friend of mine, when COVID was first starting to break out, he called me up and he said, do you want to buy half of a pig? And after a long pause, I said to him, you bought a whole pig, didn't you? And you want me to buy the other half of it? And he said, yes, he admitted that was true. So he kind of freaked out when he couldn't get any meat in the stores, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. One of the things that did not slow down during the COVID pandemic was farmers markets. They actually exploded as people sought out direct pathways to be able to make sure that their own food chain, if you will, was uninterrupted, even if they didn't have to rely or couldn't rely anymore on the regular one. So you may be asking yourself the question then, if I can get all of this stuff delivered directly to my door, why do I need to go to stores anymore? Why is there a need for these? In fact, we see this every day. There's almost a daily headline of a store that's gone bankrupt or shut down or closed more than 100 locations, right? So this is the opening of the IKEA store in Fishers. And so you see all these people, standing in line and cheering and waiting for the store to open. Why are they doing this, right? You can get cheap screw-together furniture anywhere. Why do I go to IKEA to get it, right? And the answer is the experience. When I go to IKEA, I get to walk through the rooms. I get to sit on the couches. Maybe I get some Swedish meatballs. It's an experience. It's not just a place to shop. See, it's very difficult to package up experiences and send them to your home via DoorDash driver. It's very difficult to get an authentic experience that you might get if you go to a restaurant with the hot new chef, or to go to a concert and see the band. Obviously, I can listen to it on my iPhone, but it's much better to go. And so the shopping that survives, the stores that survive over the long term, are the ones that are not just about getting a commodity product conveniently. They're the ones that turn it into an experience. And so that I'm drawn to it for the entertainment value of it, not just for the shopping value of it. That's what really IKEA understands. The last example I'll give you has to do with our social fabric. With all of the turmoil and upheaval that we've had in our society over the last year, one of the things that you consistently see is people seeking to find out for themselves what really happened in regards to some of these events. They want to see the body camera footage. And if there's not body cameras on the police officers, they want to know why. And the reason for this is because we all want to seek authenticity in what it is that we're seeing. We want to know for ourselves, be citizen auditors of what it is that's happening, because we are just awash in a world of people that are sending messages our way. Instagram photos, tweets, spin, blogs. It's overwhelming to our brains. And we want to understand ourselves what's really happening. And that's what's really driving this need for authenticity across all age groups and all people, including when it comes to keeping our public servants honest in what it is that they do. All right, so now on to the third one, customization. The real luxury is customization. What is enabling customization? Well, what's enabling customization is something that's commonly called the Internet of Things. Hopefully that's a term you've heard of before. And what the Internet of Things really is an explosion in the smarts of everyday devices. The intelligence that's built into the everyday things that we work with on a daily basis. To illustrate this to you, I'm going to give you 3 examples of the amount of software that's baked into some devices that you know. The 1986 Lockheed F-22 Raptor, a device largely conceived of in the late 1970s, has about 1.7 million lines of software code in it, which was a tremendous amount of software for a device of that era. But if you fast forward, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, a device largely conceived of in the late 1990s, has about 6.5 million lines of software code in its avionics and control systems. That's a huge leap in the amount of software in that device in a very short period of time. But the 2021 Mercedes-Benz S-Class 550 has 20 million lines of software code in it, 14 million of which are in the radio alone. So the radio in a Mercedes-Benz has twice the amount of software than the entire avionics and control system of a 787. And a device that has to boot successfully in 2 seconds every time you turn the power on. And a device that when I was growing up was a silver box with 2 knobs on it. That is a tremendous amount of smarts, a tremendous amount of intelligence in an everyday device. And it just goes to show you what happens when you start to put that into things like clothes washers and toasters and every other device that we interact with on a daily basis. What are these devices doing? They're collecting data. And they're sending data, unbeknownst to us, to the cloud to be interpreted and understood in order to offer us goods and services in the context of the life that we lead. I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. Let's say that you're driving down the road in your car, and your car notices that you're not keeping your lane as effectively as you did about an hour ago. And it knows that it's 3 in the morning, and it thinks that you might be tired. So on screen, the message comes, would you like me to order you a coffee? And you say yes, and it finds that there's this 24-hour Starbucks 2 exits ahead, beams your payment information ahead, orders the coffee, and puts a map on the screen, the car thus having saved its own life as well as yours. Now, if you think that that's a fanciful example, I can tell you that every car radio that's been produced since about the mid-2000s has the capability to do what I just said. You may be asking yourself the question, then why doesn't my car radio order me coffee? And I'll get to that in a minute. But one question I want to pose to you to think about for a minute is, how does it know that I need coffee? See, there are all these data points that in and of themselves don't really mean very much. Spatial awareness, driver behavior patterns, customer payment information, all these things are interesting data points. But what you can do is you can collect a huge amount of data in advance, perhaps historical data, in order to train a machine learning model, more on that in a minute as well, to be able to interpret the very smallest amounts of live data to be able to understand what's going on. So for instance, you're driving down the road at 3 in the morning, 80% chance you need coffee. You wiggle in your lane ever so slightly, 100% chance. So only 2 live data points confirms a model that was built through machine learning through the collection of data from everyday devices in advance. And that is what is driving, that phenomenon is what is driving the capability of huge amounts of customization in the products and services and goods that we interact with. So let's get some impacts of that. Here's one, is there's an impact on charitable giving. Gone are the days when you used to just check off 2% of your paycheck to the United Way and let someone else handle it for you. People today want to know where their money is going. They want to see how they're moving the needle. If you're donating to a well in Africa, you want to see the well, right? So we're seeing a desire for a huge amount of customization, even in something like charitable giving. Another example is what's called additive manufacturing, or commonly called 3D printing. This is, if you're not familiar with this, it's advanced a lot far beyond just printing with plastic. We can now print glass, we can print metal, we can print all kinds of things in 3 dimensions in just a very short period of time. And what is this really doing? What it's doing is it's blurring the lines between the idea of what is a prototype and what is a production model. See, the means to produce a production products, like say a screw or a mount, were very different than how you would produce a prototype. You would produce a prototype in a lab with certain sets of tools and equipment and get it all right the way that you wanted, and then you'd send it to production to be able to have molds made or whatever. But now, because of additive manufacturing, we have the ability to change the product in flight, meaning that if there's a way that we can make the product more resilient or a little bit cheaper or a little bit faster, we can now make a software change, and the very next product that's produced on the line has that change included within it. And so it's blurring that line between what is a prototype and what is a production manufactured product, and allowing us to do continuous engineering improvement on the products that are being produced on the line in the ways that we've been doing that with software and other things really for years and years and years. Here's another impact. Anybody remember seeing this scene in a store not too long ago? The shortage of toilet paper, a lot has been written about this, believe it or not, was not just because, everybody was trying to hoard it. There was a little bit of that going on. The big problems really were twofold. First and foremost, the supply chain for producing and delivering consumer toilet paper is very different than the supply chain for producing and distributing commercial toilet paper. They all begin with the sort of same paperboard, but from there on, it's a very different process. Consumer toilet paper is often thicker, it's often softer, it's often sold in small 4-roll packages, whereas commercial toilet paper is often thinner, it's often sold in pallets. And so there was not an easy way for manufacturers and the supply chain to shift fire right when they needed to produce more toilet paper for home use. And why did they need to produce more toilet paper for home use? Well, because you weren't at the office. You were at home. So you were going, if you will, at home and not at the office. And so the demand rose tremendously for home toilet paper, and it collapsed for commercial toilet paper, and the toilet paper industry and its manufacturing processes and supply chain couldn't keep up. And that was what really caused the change or the problem with toilet paper. And it showed us how unresilient our supply chain was, and really in small and major ways, even for things as simple as toilet paper, to be able to deal with the COVID predicament. So another example of this sort of transportation issue rearing its ugly head, there we go, is a company called Stitch Fix. Anybody familiar with this company? What they do is you fill out a questionnaire online of not only the size of clothes that you are and how tall you are, but also the styles that you like to wear. And what they'll do is they'll send you a box every month that has clothing in it that's picked out by a stylist for you. And it's always in your same size, and it's always in your same style. And you pull out of the box and try it all on, and you keep what you want and put back in the box what you don't, and then they charge you for what you keep. So it allows you to have your own personal stylist on demand to be able to help you get exactly the kind of clothing that you want whenever and wherever you want it. Another impact of this is in the e-gaming industry, which, if you haven't noticed, has exploded as well. not just because of COVID, but in general. And what this is really offering is the opportunity for kids in schools and even adults that may not be very athletic to be able to experience the benefits of team sports, to be a part of a team and to feel like they're part and belong and have a role that they're playing with other people on the team, even if they can't run up and down a football field. A lot of us have seen this scene as well, where we had laws that kind of prohibited us from seeing doctors virtually, but they all fell very quickly at the beginning of the pandemic so that we could get our medicines and prescriptions and be able to be treated by doctors for ailments. But what's going on in this industry is a shift from telemedicine to telehealth. See, we're now wearing all these devices. I'm wearing one myself that can do this and take my blood pressure or my heart rate. We're moving very rapidly to a world where we're going to be having a constant stream of data sent about us to the cloud that's in regard to our health. And with machine learning models and other sorts of nifty tools that we can employ with it, we now have the ability to monitor the systems of your body like we might monitor an HVAC system or an electrical grid. So that one day you might get a call from your doctor that says, we've been watching your heart rate for the last week, unbeknownst to you, and we don't really like what we see. So we'd like you to come in and maybe to get a deeper scan. So the ability to monitor your health and keep yourself healthy and maintained through electronic devices is an era that we are entering in very rapidly here, and that's as a result of these smart devices that allow our health care to be customized to our very specific needs. And one sort of esoteric and a wide-ranging example of that at the same time is the idea of customized medicine. One of the amazing things that I have observed is the business model around this company called 23andMe. Has anybody done this? Like swabbed your cheek and sent in? This is an amazing business model to me because can you imagine the value of a database of all of human DNA? It's unconscionable. And yet, not only are they taking that data from you, you're paying them to take it, which is amazing to me, right? And so a question I posed a minute ago, thinking about that car driving down the road, you're at 3 a.m, and my car can do that if it's a reasonable age. And you ask the question, well, why doesn't my car order me coffee? And the answer is, you don't want it to. How many people do you not want to know that you're weaving in your lane at 3 a.m? And even if you could get over that, well, who else wants that data? Well, Dunkin' Donuts wants that data. Hilton had a hotel room they didn't sell the night before, and so they like to give it to you half off. Who wants their car spamming them as they drive down the road? What's the first thing you do when you find that an app is tracking your location? You shut it off, right? So you don't want to be traced and tracked in that way. And so what's been happening is entire industries have grown up where companies are essentially stealing your data from you and monetizing it for you. How many of you in this room have a Nest Learning thermostat on your wall at home, a smart thermostat? A handful. That's pretty typical. And when I ask people why not, usually they say, well, it's kind of expensive and a little wonky for what it does, or I just really don't like Google knowing when I'm coming and going from my house. It's kind of creepy. But what if you got a letter at the end of the month, every month, that said, dear you, encloses a check for the value of your data this month. Keep it up, sincerely, Alphabet. You might have a very different perspective on having a Google Learning thermostat on your wall. A few years ago, some of us were really angry at Facebook because they sold your data to Cambridge Analytica, right? Remember that? Well, you kind of knew they were selling your data. Why were you angry? And the answer is because you didn't get a cut. Right? If Facebook sent you a check for the value of that data, you'd be going through old boxes of photographs trying to post everything you possibly could on Facebook because you want that check. And so you see there's all these industries that are essentially stealing your data from you and monetizing it for you. And 23andMe proves that only the smallest amount of value do you have to give back. I now know that I can smell onions more than other people can. Right? It's almost a parlor trick. But for that small amount of give back, I get a huge amount of value that I'm giving over. And that DNA allows us to potentially be able to figure out how to create medicines that are customized just for you. Instead of having a one-size-fits-all vaccine or a one-size-fits-all painkiller, we now have the ability very shortly to be able to take your own DNA stream and use it to modify medicines so they become more effective for your specific genetic pattern and send them to you on demand as you need them to be able to prove their efficacy. Last example I'll give you in customization is really about the very companies that we work with and we want to do business with. There is a new trend to something called a benefits corporation or a B Corp. Some of you in this room may have heard of that before. Some of you in this room may be part of one of them. But a B Corp is a corporation that puts in its charter a public benefit for the existence of the corporation beyond just making money. And it can be anything they want. But what it means is that the owners of the company or the leaders of the company are then compelled to use some of the assets and resources of the company in service of the public benefit. And this is a growing trend, not just because it's a good thing to do, but because consumers are increasingly wanting to spend money with and on products of companies that align to what it is that they believe and want to see happen. And this is particularly true for employees. They definitely want to work increasingly for companies that align to what it is that they see that they want to have changed in the world. And so what's driving this trend is not just doing the right thing, it's just smart business. It's in tapping into the desires of people to customize the very companies that they work with and work for. Fourth one, global learning. Megatrend 4, the global e-learning market is on fire. Boy, that is true. This is a picture of the first two cavemen making fire. Good news is we had a photographer present, so there they are. The guy on the left is making fire, and the guy on the right is trying to learn how to make fire. Now, the guy on the right, he didn't go take a college course. He didn't check out a book from the library. What he did was he watched the guy on the left make fire, tried to do it himself, failed, and then was corrected and did it again until he got it right, which I will submit to you is how all humans have ever learned anything, is by observing other humans trying, failing, being corrected, and doing it again over and over again. If you were unfortunate to drop your cell phone on the sidewalk outside and crack the screen, a lot of us would go to YouTube and search how to replace an iPhone screen. And if you thought that it was within your capability set, you go to Amazon and you order an iPhone replacement screen kit. You should probably order 2 because you're going to screw the first one up. And then when the box shows up, you open it up, you go back to the YouTube video, and you watch the person replace the screen on the iPhone. And if you do this successfully, you've now done an incredibly technical task that you've never gone to school for and never even thought you might have done this morning when you got up, just by watching another human do something and emulating them and trying and failing. So what is the impact of this idea then on our world? Well, a lot of us saw this scene in our homes, e-learning, which did not work. I'm just going to call that out loud. It was a major disaster. But the major disaster wasn't at the hands of the poor teachers or even the poor students or the parents. They're not at fault here. What's at fault here is that you cannot take content that was designed to be delivered in a highly structured environment and deliver it through a completely unstructured environment. You see, the school systems are incredibly controlled for good reason. You have to be in a room, in a seat, at a certain time before the bell rings, every moment of your existence in that building. And so, if little Johnny decides that he needs to go to the bathroom, he has to get a hall pass, right? But you can't enforce that at a home. If little Johnny wants to go to the bathroom or he's bored with this lesson, what's he going to do? He's going to get up and walk away, turn it off, and that's exactly what they did. So you can't have the same content delivered in the same way through e-learning. That's why it didn't work. And so the content has to change if the delivery vehicle has to change, and it didn't. But that is feeding into another massive problem that we have with the overall efficacy of our school system as it's currently in existence. Here in Indiana, we have about 65,000 high school graduates every spring, give or take a few hundred. And we have an organization here in our state, every state does, that sort of coordinates higher education policy. And they put out reports, like every state does, about how we're doing in regards to higher education. Here in Indiana, we're about middle of the pack on this, just so you know, but I'll give you the stats. For every 100 of those high school graduates in Indiana that graduate high school, and of those 100, 35 of them will not go to college at all. Of the 65 that do, only 32 of them will graduate. Of the 32 of them that graduate, only 16 of them will get a job in the field they studied. And of those 16, 4 of them will be unemployed after the first year. That's the stats. Did you know that? I didn't. And that means that the system that we have here in our state that says, if you get good enough grades in one of our high schools and go to one of our colleges, has a whopping 12% success rate. I can't think of any other industry, perhaps, except for maybe baseball, where 12% is an acceptable hit rate. And so what's going on here is that the students are onto it. They're realizing that this highly controlled, highly organized system is not actually delivering for them what it is that they need. And so they're in running it. We have an organization here in Indianapolis called 1150 Academy. Some of you may have heard of it before if you're from around here. 1150 Academy is a private trade school for coding. You see, when I was in college, software development was a college degree. I actually have it. It's hanging on my wall at home. But I can tell you with great confidence right now, it is not anymore. It is not a college degree. It's a trade. It's not unlike a plumber or an electrician for the digital economy. And so the idea of loading up with a huge amount of debt and going to school for 4 years to be a software developer, the kids are onto it. And instead what they're doing is they're going to trade schools to learn just what they need to know, just as they need to have it, with a minimal amount of debt and a maximum amount of time to be able to implement their career as quickly as possible and start earning money based on the skill that they learned. And they realize that they're going to have to learn and relearn radically different trades and skills multiple times throughout their entire life, and they're just ready to get on with it. And so they are starting to reject the system that we put together for them in higher education and in our high schools in favor of much more tactical learning based on observing other humans doing things, trying, failing, being corrected, and doing it over and over again until they get it right, which is how all humans learn things. Even YouTube has figured this out. YouTube is essentially a big system for watching other people do things. I came home the other day and my kids were watching videos on YouTube of people playing video games. And I'm like, what could be more boring than that? Why aren't you playing the video game? They're watching the video game. Then I realized what they were doing is it's sort of like a sporting event for them. Like I might watch baseball, they might watch a video game. They're learning tips and tricks, and they want to try to apply those. And so YouTube has launched Learn at Home. It's an entire set of channels all designed to feed into this gig economy bent learning model of learning on demand with a small amount of capital outlay, in this case none, to be able to learn new skills by watching other humans do things. But then there are some times where we actually have to experience something more three-dimensional, and we can't necessarily get there. So this gentleman is putting on a pair of gloves on his hands, which are real. In a minute, he's going to grab a Coke bottle and take a swig out of it, which is real. And he's going to grab a steering wheel in front of him, which is also real. But everything else in this scene is not real. It's completely simulated in 3 dimensions in a goggles that he is wearing to be able to immerse himself, in this case, in the experience of driving a car on a racetrack. Our ability to simulate experiences virtually has continued to accelerate at an accelerating rate. And we now have the ability to drop ourselves into crazy experiences that we would never be able to do face-to-face or dangerous or on-demand or too expensive through the simulation of what it is we're doing so that we can learn, so that we can improve, so that we can understand more about what it is that we're doing in this world. Now onto our last megatrend, number 5, autonomy. Autonomy leads to empowerment. Absolutely true. So what's really enabling autonomy? What's enabling autonomy is something that I like to call machine learning. I don't like to use the term artificial intelligence, which is the term that a lot of people use, because it's not really intelligence and there's nothing artificial about it. You see, the way that our brain works is it takes in experiences through our senses, smells, sights, sounds, and encodes them in neurons in our brain. And we use those experiences like a lens through which to see what it is that's going on in the world around us. That's why small children don't talk much, and we all talk about them being little TV cameras. Their brains are forming those initial sets of patterns. It's also why we can get a huge amount of meaning or understanding from just a flip of an eyebrow or a smirk, without even being able to hear someone talk, because our brain has been wired to be able to understand those little small nuances and be able to get great meaning from them. This is also why when you see videos of things like a concert, a fire at a concert, or a shooting at a concert, oftentimes you'll see people sort of dancing away and swaying to the music and not really cognitively realizing that they are in deep trouble. People say, well, I thought it was part of the show. There's a very famous concert video fire where the flames are shooting up the back of the stage, and the photographer that's taking the pictures actually starts backing away from the stage as the flames are starting to rise. The reason why is because that photographer, his day job was he was a news photographer for a local TV station, and so he had been in a lot of dangerous situations before, and his brain was wired to understand that he was in trouble, whereas the other students who had never seen or experienced that before, kids in there, didn't understand it because their brains couldn't understand it. So that process of wiring our brains with those neurons is how it is that we think. But curiously, we have not been using computers in this way. What we've been doing is we have been instead using them as data processing machines to essentially accelerate things that we manually do as humans to tabulate and process points of data. But machine learning is really about teaching computers to learn the way we do. One of our customers is a wind farm turbine operator, and what they do is they send up drones to take pictures of the wind turbines to look for damage. But then what you get is a whole bunch of pictures. And can you imagine the poor engineer that's looking at the 10,000th one of these pictures every morning, to see if there's any damage and how accurate that is? So what they paid us to do is to build a machine learning model that actually would look for damage in these pictures. And so how do you do that? Well, what you do is you send all the pictures, or a group of the pictures, to the cloud, and you'd say essentially through code, you figure out where the damage is. Well, of course, it doesn't know, it doesn't understand. And so what you do is you have a human who is knowledgeable correct it in a process called sentencing. And then you run more of the pictures through, and then you correct it again, and then you run more of the pictures through, and you correct it again, and then eventually you can run them all through. And then the machine learning model has then learned through corrective iterative correcting of its model to be able to process a huge amount of pictures of damage and pick out just the ones that it thinks probably have the damage for the engineer to look at. And that's an application of machine learning. And that's changing everything about what it is we do. It allows us to be able to have vehicles that can maneuver on sidewalks and around traffic and deliver products. These are already on up in West Lafayette at Purdue. If you ever happen to be there, you'll see these little things running around doing delivery of fast food. So instead of dispatching the DoorDash driver, what you can do is put the food in one of these little units and dispatch it across the sidewalk to your home. And then when your meal arrives, you get a buzzer on your cell phone, and you use the app to open up the top of it and pull out your prescription or your bottle of water or your cheeseburger based on having this autonomous delivery. This would be completely impossible if you didn't have machine learning models that could take in all of the things that are happening as you move across the sidewalk and be able to maneuver around everything and not run over everything or get crushed by a car. It's something that is only enabled by that machine learning technology. Here's another example, moving a little upstream. This is an autonomous UPS delivery truck. Those of you who are near the front, can you see what's coming out of the top of it? Yeah, it's a drone. This is how drones are likely to be used for package delivery, because droning packages all the way across a city like Indianapolis is fraught with lawyers. So the best way to do it is to actually drive the truck to the edge of your street and then use the UPS or the drone to ferry the package to the doorstep. And very quickly we're going to be in a world where I'll be able to order, say, a T-shirt online using my cell phone, and then 15 minutes later this truck will show up at my front door or at the end of the street, drone a box over, and then I open the box, pull the T-shirt out. If it's the wrong size, put it back in the box, hit the app again. 15 minutes later, truck comes back, picks up the old box, puts a new one on the doorstep, and drives away. And that ability is already happening with companies like UPS, where they're starting to dispatch trucks from Amazon distribution centers with anticipated items. So they've been able to study the data enough to be able to figure out what people will likely want to have by the end of the day. And so they're actually preloading the trucks with boxes, expecting that sometime along the course of the day, someone will order that product and it'll already be on the truck ready to drop off at their front door. Move upstream a little bit more. This is an autonomous Volvo semi-truck. What this is doing is it's hooking up into a trailer in order to be able to move around imagine the value of these devices in a big shipping yard or a big warehousing operation. Instead of having to find a driver and hook it up, now you can just sort of drone them around. Sort of the ultimate expression of this, though, is the autonomous Tesla semi-truck. I don't know if you've read about this before, but this little baby goes 0 to 60 in 7 seconds, hauling 32,000 pounds of freight, and can go over 400 miles without a charge and without a driver. And so what this is going to do is it's going to rapidly change the over-the-road trucking industry and turn truck drivers into less of drivers and more like over-the-road conductors that are managing a train as it moves across the landscape. Here's another example. It's one of my favorites. This is a robot in the farm field. What we've been farming, as it turns out, in the light of day since they're beginning farming because we have to see. But what we've been learning is that when we use automated vehicles to do farming, it's actually better for the plants if we do it at night, which makes sense. They tell you not to mow your lawn in the bright, hot sunlight, of the summer day, but the same thing is true for farms. We've also gotten most of our increase in yields from agriculture over the last quarter century from chemicals. What are we spraying on the field? What are we spraying on the seeds? But now what we have is the ability to roll across the field, take a picture of a particular plant, spray just the right amount of herbicide or pesticide, just the right amount of water, sample the soil, pick the weed, as this one is doing, and then roll on to the next foot and the next foot and the next foot, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And now we have the ability to optimize every square inch of field without the use of mass amounts of chemicals and overseeding and overwatering, and be able to improve our yields while reducing the amount of chemicals that we're using simply through the use of machine learning. One more example to share with you. This is the autonomous Google vehicle, or sometimes known as the Waymo. This is in Austin, Texas. This gentleman is a professor, I believe, at a university. He's been blind his entire life, has had to have someone drive him everywhere he goes for obvious reasons, but now he owns this vehicle, and it drives him everywhere he needs to go. He no longer needs a driver. Completely hands-off, anywhere he wants to go, anytime he wants, all without being able to actually see out the front window. The application of autonomous vehicles is probably something that is the most far-reaching example of all of these megatrends. And I'll put it this way for you, mathematically, because I'm kind of a math guy and I like to think of things that way. The average American spends about 101 minutes of their day every day driving a car. A little less here in the Midwest, a little bit more on the coast. You will have your driver's license on average for 61 years before your grandchildren will take it away from you. And that means that you will spend, on average, a little less than 38,000 hours of your life driving a vehicle. There are about 221 million registered drivers in America, which means collectively we spend a little bit more than 8.4 trillion hours of our lives watching road reflectors zip by, except for not anymore. We're about to get all of that time back. It is the biggest one-time leap in human productivity ever. And it's all enabled through that idea of autonomy. So there they are, the gig economy, authenticity, customization, global learning, and autonomy. 5 megatrends that are rapidly shaping the world that we are in and living in right now. And so if you're like me, one of the things you might be asking to yourself is, what are we going to do about that at our organization? If those things are megatrends that are shaping the global economy, how are we responding to that? Because if we're not, we're in trouble. Well, there's a few things that are necessary to make innovation happen, and I can give them to you in just 1 minute flat. The first one is ideas, and that's good news. They're free. Everybody has them. You have them. Everyone in your organization has them. There's no shortage of those things. But to make an idea work, you need 3 things. And we were taught in school, the fire triangle, that in order to have fire, you have to have oxygen, fuel, and heat, right? Well, it's the same thing to make an idea work. You have to take an idea and you have to pour 3 elements on it: budget, people, and culture. Or as we say in the startup business, capital, talent, and place. If you don't have one of those elements, you have no fire. And if you don't have those elements for an idea, you have no new business model. It requires all three of those things. But the most important thing is to think about is the culture, because we can find capital, we can hire talent. But if you don't have the right place for innovation to occur, none of it will work. So what is a culture? Culture is, by my definition, and I get to define it because I'm standing up here and you're not, is the unwritten rules about how things are or not done at your organization. If I were to walk up to an employee at my company and punch them in the face, how would they feel? They would be angry. They would probably punch me back. They would go get a box. They would walk out. They'd be very upset, right? But nowhere in my employee manual does it say, don't punch people in the face. So not resorting to punching people in the face or not resorting to physical violence is an unwritten rule about how things are not done around my organization. And the entire collection of those things is your culture. And your culture is no more under threat than with every new employee that you bring into your organization, because they got things done according to a certain set of rules at the previous company they were at. And they would just assume not change. But those aren't your rules. You got your own rules. And so you need to make sure that you are watching and being careful about the culture that you are building. And do you have an innovative culture in your organization? Do you allow those ideas that you and your employees have to take flight by giving them the right elements to be able to change and adapt and grow in the face of these megatrends? Chances are the answer is no. Ernst & Young did a survey of a whole bunch of corporations, and they found that 69% of American workers would leave their current role for a position at a company considered an innovation leader. In other words, 69%, almost 3/4 of American workers, maybe you too, would leave the job that you're in just to work at another company that you consider to be more innovative. And that doesn't even speak to whether or not they're going to give you a bigger title or more money. You would go just because they're an innovation leader. And there's an enormous gap between what it is that leadership thinks that they're doing and what employees really think is happening when it comes to innovation in an organization. For example, fear of failure. Do our leaders provide incentives for accomplishments and are tolerant of failure? That sort of try it, fail, learn, try it again until you get it right. 79% of the surveyed C-suite executives say, yes, we have an organization that's tolerant of failure. 25% of entry-level employees said so. Another example, lack of collaboration. Do you offer programs that allow people to get outside of the regular running lane and collaborate with other people in order to make big ideas out of small ones? 69% of companies offer those programs, but only 12% of employees say that they're successful. So even if you think you're doing something about making an innovative organization, chances are you may fall into one of those groups and categories. And the metrics don't exist either. You only get results from what you measure. So what we've determined is that there are about 10 different barriers to innovation. I'm putting a QR code up here, which you can either snap with your camera or you can get this presentation online later on. It's in there as well. Or you can just go to this website that I'll put up here for you, or this email address. We'll send them to you for free. I want you to study them, and I want you to take a look and ask yourself the question, do you have these innovation barriers in your organization? Because if you do, you're going to be in trouble. And because these changes and these megatrends that are driving our society are not going away, they're only accelerating. And if you're not ready to make the changes that are necessary to your own organization, your own business to be able to take advantage of them, you will be the victim and not the victor of these megatrends. Thank you so much for listening this afternoon.